Welcome to the Blinding Talent Music Industry Podcast 2025, the place where industry heavyweights spill secrets, share wisdom, and occasionally just overshare. What a year it's been. We've tackled the real building blocks of the business. A&R, marketing, TikTok strategy, mental health, sync, distribution, and the future of music itself, including whether robots are coming for all of our jobs. Spoiler, jury's still out. Might happen, who knows? Today we're rewinding all of the absolute best bits, the standout insights, the big laughs, the wow, did they really just say that moments that defined our first full year and sparked conversations right the way across the industry. And to every single one of you who listened, watched, subscribed, commented, debated, or even just shouted at the screen, thank you. This community is growing really fast and you're the heartbeat of it. Sit back, plug in and enjoy the ride. This is the Blinding Talent Music Industry Podcast, Best of the Year. Let's go.
When Kurt Cobain died, there was this big thing about everybody wanted to speak to the other Seattle bands to get their reaction. It was quite mercenary, actually. I certainly didn't feel comfortable with it. They were all clamoring. And eventually, a few weeks later, Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam said that he would do one interview to be syndicated to every TV station that wanted it. And they said, well, who do you want to do the interview? And he said, Vanessa from MTV, which was the most incredible honour. And I was flown over to Boston onto their American tour, and I met with Eddie. He was extremely emotional, and I found it difficult because I wanted him to say what he wanted to say, not being forced by me. I wanted him to express it in his own way. So I didn't go hard in with, well, you know, how are you feeling about what happened to Kurt? And it was the most lovely interview, and there were tears. And at the end, he hugged me and he said, thank you so much for being so sympathetic and empathetic towards me. He said, I'm absolutely in pieces because of it. And then there was a big rush to get this tape, and, you know, everybody was clamoring to get it and send it out. So yeah, it was the band's support as well as the fans of the show that I think kept me there so long. This might sound a bit strange, but I think the Spice Girls did a lot of good work in this area because they were in control of their career. They were in control of what they were wearing. They were encouraging people in self-expression, other females in self-expression. And, you know, I think they had a lot to do with for people for females to wanting to come into the music industry, to feel more confident and to be more, I guess, set boundaries and so on. And, you know, I take my hat off to them for that.
And I think, you know, if we're thinking about you being in the early part of the 90s, going into the mid-90s with Spice Girls, into the late 90s with artists like Alanis Morissette and these kind of real challenger female artists in the pop, commercial, rock, alternative, doesn't matter what space, but in the music industry, that was a really important time for men too, like myself, you know, as a teenager in the 90s, actually being inspired. I loved Alanis Morissette. I loved what she said. And Debbie Harry, I think you mentioned on one of your other interviews recently, someone that you never met.
Yeah.
But I remember coming across Debbie Harry in the 90s and actually going backwards and looking back into the catalogue of what she's been involved in. And actually, good God, she shaped punk culture.
Yep.
And I don't think she necessarily gets all the credit for that too.
Well, she's responsible for me bleaching my hair when I was 16.
Right.
I've kept it like that ever since.
Brilliant. Well, look, I think your badge of Queen of Metal is thoroughly deserved, and I think they used the phrase. I think they used the phrase OG. You know, now I'm sounding really old. Right? My kids will say, "Oh, you're an OG Queen of Metal." So I don't know what that makes like, but I do think, you know, I do take my hat off to you for a lot of the work you've done in this space, and I really, really, really hope that, you know, today's presenter talent and the female curators and the people that are leading the charge in that space really, really are able to understand and reflect back on that.
The phone rang at 8 a.m. on the Monday morning, and it was my agent, and she said, Vanessa, there's a placement today that I think you should take. And I said, okay. And she said, it's at MTV. It's for one day. They need somebody to help out with something just for one day. And I said, well, look, I'm exhausted, it's raining, I don't really feel like going for one day. And she said, take my word for it, Vanessa, you should go. It's only been in the UK for 6 months. It's a really happening place and there's a lot of opportunity there. And thank God she did,
right.
because I went, and the rest, as they say, is history.
You know, it comes across, you know, maybe once every few years. I think the last one for me was Sleep Token, probably, you know, when I signed that a few years ago. In kind of very early days.
Can I ask about Sleep Token? So what stood out with Sleep Token? I think from a branding perspective, you know, as someone that is very much involved in branding and branding artists and digital marketing, that side, I think Sleep Token are a brilliant example for artists to look at and go, this is a brand. Yeah. It's a challenging brand. It's a disruptor brand. It's speaking to you on lots of different levels. So tell me a bit about how that started with you. Where did I'm guessing it was the music first.
It was, yeah.
But then how did that form into Sleep Token?
Actually, it's a really good example of the, you know, the music first. You know, the Sleep Token that you see now, there was like a kernel, like a very small seed of what that is kind of back then, and it was always going to be this kind of project that was kind of shrouded in anonymity and, you know, and whatever. But again, none of that stuff works if the music's shit. It's like, it just won't stick. But the thing that really has stood out for me is when I heard those kind of first songs and those first demos, it was just that it was the fact that I was hearing this voice that had this very, very pop approach, pop tone, the way that they were writing and constructing and composing these songs was just kind of done in this way that was instantly relatable for a very, very wide audience. But they were ultimately kind of, at that time, kind of Frankensteining this like big metal sound, like in the middle of it all somewhere, you know, like either with a chorus or a crushing ending or, you know, something or other. And I was just like, there's no one else that's doing this right now. No one. And, you know, there were a few kind of things that maybe were a hint at that or whatever. And that for me was the thing. I've been in shows, or I've been kind of, you know, side stage for, you know, like Metallica or, you know, like Pantera or, you know, whatever. And you're kind of, you know, you're talking to the people in those bands. You know, Metallica were like massively influential on me. You know, going back to what I was saying about being into music when I was 10, I think I was bought in my first metal record. I think I was bought on my 12th birthday, which was an Iron Maiden record called Somewhere in Time on cassette, of course. And then I was skateboarding with my mates when I was 12 and I broke my arm coming off my skateboard. And whilst I was off school, my best mate lent me do you remember those tape boxes with the flip top?
Oh, I do.
Yeah. No one listening to this is going to know what that is. But it was a box that you could store at least 20 cassettes in.
I mean, almost certainly there'll be some hipsters from East London that are going,
probably.
We totally know what that is.
Yeah, they've got loads of those.
Yeah.
But anyway, whilst I was off school with a broken arm, he lent me this box of cassettes, and in there was And Justice for All by Metallica.
Oh, nice.
And I put that tape in my stereo, and I just had heard nothing like it before at that point. And I was, 12, 13, something like that. So that basically was the start of my lifelong obsession and love affair with Metallica as a band. And I think that, just kind of before we were doing this, we mentioned local band Unpeople, who I'm also working with. They had the great fortune of being asked to open for Metallica in Austria a couple of months ago. So I went out there with them for that, and just being on that stage, like even during the day when they were setting everything up, and you know, kind of seeing the snake pit and seeing Lars's like 4 drum kits that he has popping out of the stage, and kind of like seeing them testing the hydraulics and all of that, like I just kind of like flipped back and was like, man, like that kid sitting on his bed with a broken arm listening to that cassette would be amazing. Absolutely, like, just, he would never believe it that he's standing on Metallica's stage. It is the big topic, and I know it's boring, but it's AI. I think there's so many possibilities that we're not even kind of scratching the surface with, and for me, it's not something I'm particularly scared of in terms of our industry. I think that there needs to be regulation where possible, and I think that there needs to be some kind of overview and some kind of scope in terms of, or legal framework in terms of how we're using these tools and whatever. But yeah, I just think the possibilities are endless, and I kind of think about these things that come along every, they're happening faster and faster, obviously, with the improvements in technology now. But I kind of feel like it feels to me, these worries about AI are a little bit like when the first drum machine came along and everyone, all drummers and percussionists were like, well, we're out of a job, and it's like, no, it's just a tool to make something else, it's just, it's just another option. It's just something else for you to help your creative process. And what's going to happen is that people aren't going to fall out of love with the original drum sound, with an organic drum sound. Like I still, to this day, I would love standing behind people that are like, bashing away on the kit and whatever. I've got so much respect for high-end drummers and whatever, but I'm not sitting there thinking, well, we could probably save a bit of effort here and program all that. So I feel the same way about AI, to be honest. It's like, I think the best artists out there are using the tools available and really using them to their advantage. And I think, of course, it's speeding processes up, and it's still a bit messy from time to time. But I think what will happen is that all of these things are inevitably pendulum swings. You're kind of going into a big kind of swing that's going to be like, you're going to have this influx of AI generated stuff, and we've seen that already. Tons of music kind of flooding streaming platforms and whatever. But what will always happen in these instances is that the marketplace or the consumer will always choose, and they'll always choose quality, and they'll always choose, sort of something people want to feel something that's real, at the end of the day. If that's been helped by AI to be generated in terms of like, I don't know, give me 10 song ideas about heartbreak or, whatever, just to kind of get the seed of something going to write lyrics or, whatever. Fine. I don't think anybody, if the end product of that kind of feels real and feels genuine, then that's the thing that I think the audiences are going to connect with, and that is the thing that will inevitably still last the test of time. I think it's exciting that we're working with so many artists now that are using AI to mix their records and using AI to master their records, and of course there are amazing mastering and mixing engineers out there, but I don't think it's they will always still be needed. It's not. I don't think it's going to completely replace what they do, because some people, and artists especially, are not going to want the finished product that mixing with AI gives them. I've seen it happen even with Atmos mixes. Where I've sat in a studio with an Atmos engineer, and what they've done and what they've created has been so tailored and bespoke that final performance of what you're hearing, you just can't compare it. There is that, AI is just not getting close to that.
When I decided to quit drinking and drugs in June 2022, I would look back at it now and say I definitely had an issue with drugs and drink, but I wouldn't say I was necessarily a typical addict who needed to go to a recovery program. For context, it wasn't like, I was doing drugs 7 nights a week and I was off my nut, but I got into what I would call like habitual addiction, which I think is something we don't talk about in the music industry. Like you say, currency, a word to just pick up on from you, like when you go to a gig with a new band and the promoter can't afford to pay them, so they say, well, there's 40 beers and a bottle of vodka as payment. What do we expect to happen? There has to be some accountability for those of us in the industry to protect the people, including ourselves, right? So anyway, that first like month of sobriety was like the best thing I've ever done. And in classic, I had what they call the pink cloud. So I was like a puppy dog. I was like, wow. So I was listening to all these podcasts and consuming all the literature. And don't get me wrong, there was some amazing stuff out there. So I'm not by far not saying like we're the best. But it felt so important to me that there were kind of some voices that people could identify with. So when I approached Tom, my co-host, about it, it just felt like something that would be really natural to do. And to be honest, we didn't want it to be music industry focused. And I think we've done quite well to pat ourselves on the back of it not being music industry focused, but having an array of guests on from the industry. And like you say, we talk about everything from alcoholism, addiction, grief, dating, etc. But yeah, for me, it was really about somewhere where people could have us in their ears. It felt like a conversation with your mates down the pub or in someone's living room, and kind of feel colloquial, no judgment, real honesty, super raw, and just something that people can really dig into. But it's honestly, like, I'm so grateful for my job. I'm so grateful for my clients. But in terms of like personal at like my own personal journey, that's been the thing I'm probably the most proud of, because I see the impact it's having on people.
Absolutely, and applaud you
Thanks.
for it, because I'm a listener. I'm a soberer, or whatever you want to call yourself. So I don't know what your fans are called. Do you have fan names?
No, absolutely not.
Not yet.
No, of course not.
Not yet. Come
No,
on,
I don't want.
Dream the dream and do it anyway.
No.
But no, seriously, it's an amazing podcast. But I think, like I say, we talk about, with Blind in Talent, we talk to our artists all the time, and it's also kind of why this podcast is existing, because I was kind of a little bit bored of hearing another music industry podcast that's talking about PPL and PRS and this really
make sure you collect all your
make sure you get all of your royalties, even your neighbouring ones, but you don't know about them.
Then you won't get them for 4 years, but don't worry about that.
But yeah. Yeah. Oh, slight dick. Who's that for?
I'm joking. I'm joking.
Cancel. No, but genuinely, I think that's kind of what this is about. This is about having real conversations about the industry and touching on all of these points. And look, we're not going to say, hey, we're a well-being podcast and we're here to talk about this. We're just here to talk about the music industry and kind of hopefully people listening will just get a wider perspective on some of the challenges and some of the good stuff. I mean, it's not all shit, right? Yeah. We're very privileged. We've done some cool stuff.
Mate, 100%.
But that podcast, I just think, and you're right, when I listen to it, it doesn't feel like a music industry podcast. It feels like a great podcast about a very specific subject, but done in a really friendly, open way. No judgment. I think you say that at the beginning of every podcast. No judgment.
Yeah.
And I love that because it sets the scene correctly for people listening.
Thank you. I guess let's just break that down a little bit, just in the industry perspective of like how we feel as individuals, right? Because there's obviously, as a manager or as a label or whatever, you have an element of care and of duty to the artist. But no one's ever there looking out for you. So if we make this about the industry side of it, I think all of us got into this job, or I'd like to think we did. None of us got into it to be multimillionaires. No. We got into it because we love money. Love money? The irony. We love cash. Give it all. We got into it because we love music. And I still, 36 years old, wake up every day genuinely grateful that my job is listening to music. Yep. However, so many of us have doubt, or like we don't have that huge belief in ourselves. And in music, everything's success related. And even when you have a success, I remember at Aloud selling out Brixton Academy for the first time, and I didn't take any of it in because in my head I was like so anxious and stressed about how the fuck am I going to sell out Ali Pally next time round, that I didn't live in the moment. And then when you insert alcohol and drugs into these things, which ultimately dumb us down, dull our brains down, make us feel more chill or more confident or whatever, it's a recipe for disaster, because 9 times out of 10 we are all these kind of fragile little souls, or that are carrying stuff from childhood, trying to make something of ourselves in this job. In management, you get paid 20% of profit. Well, if there's no profit, what are you doing? And touring is expensive, so you might have an act selling 3,000 tickets, and you might walk home at the end of the night with 15 quid. So like if someone's like, "Oh, do you want a bit of that?" You're going to feel better. You're like, "Yeah, sure." So I think we just have huge accountability to each other, to ourselves, to our artists, to the whole industry, to actually like take a step back and be like, do you have a gig at the Forum on a Tuesday, but you've ended up coked off your nut till 5 a.m, getting a cab home, but then you've got to get a cab back for a meeting at Universal at 9, but you might cancel that because you're so like, what are we, like you say, it wouldn't fly at Argos. So why do we think it's cool in music? It's, look, I've still got friends that drink, still got friends that do drugs. I'm totally up for all of it. But I think it's more about thinking about like the long-term mental well-being of people around it, because it's fucking...
So when I listened to a number of your episodes, actually, I've listened to pretty much all of them actually, I just thought, this is important. This is really important. And there was so many topics on there. When even the most recent Millie one, I think, is fantastic. Obviously, coming back to that journey a bit later on. Tell me why that podcast exists for you.
I think it's numerous things. I mean, like for me, when I decided to quit drinking and drugs in June 2022, it felt like for me, there wasn't a huge amount of literature out there that felt tailored to the every person. Even with some of the mental well-being stuff online, it can be very heavily fitness focused, it can be very heavily recovery focused. And for those of us, I would look back at it now and say I definitely had an issue with drugs and drink, but I wouldn't say I was necessarily a typical addict who needed to go to a recovery program. So after a month, I felt so amazing and my life changed so drastically. And I wasn't, for context, it wasn't like, I was doing drugs 7 nights a week and I was off my nut. But I got into what I would call like habitual addiction, which I think is something we don't talk about in the music industry. Like you say, currency, a word to just pick up on from you, like when you go to a gig with a new band and the promoter can't afford to pay them, so they say, well, there's 40 beers and a bottle of vodka as payment. What do we expect to happen? There has to be some accountability for those of us in the industry to protect the people, including ourselves, right? So anyway, that first like month of sobriety was like the best thing I've ever done. And in classic, I had what they call the pink cloud. So I was like a puppy dog. I was like, wow. So I was listening to all these podcasts and consuming all the literature. And don't get me wrong, there was some amazing stuff out there. So I'm not by far not saying like we're the best, but it felt so important to me that there were kind of some voices that people could identify with. So when I approached Tom, my co-host, about it, it just felt like something that'd be really natural to do. And to be honest, we didn't want it to be music industry focused. And I think we've done quite well to pat ourselves on the back of it not being music industry focused, but having an array of guests on from the industry. And like you say, we talk about everything from alcoholism, addiction, grief, dating, etc. But yeah, for me, it was really about somewhere where people could have us in their ears. It felt like a conversation with your mates down the pub or in someone's living room, and kind of feel colloquial, no judgment, real honesty, super raw, and just something that people can really dig into.
In your opinion, what is the one tip that you would give to, it can be an artist or anyone, but let's just say an artist in this context, to really manage their mental health?
Put your phone down. I think the internet and social media is a beautiful thing, and I think it's done incredible things to democratize music and creativity, but I think it's vicious, and I think it's a cesspit at times. And I have a lot of artists that will message me someone else's tour poster like, why aren't we doing this, when like the artist has sold 10 times the amount of tickets on their own, or they've done amazingly well. And I think, you know, as human beings, we compare ourselves to other people all the time, whether that's like the guy in the gym or like the person in the street, or you know, you bought your first house but your mate's bought his second house. Like, we're guilty of that, all of us are, and that's human nature. But for artists, I think, especially those that have, you know, that maybe have some insecurity just around creativity, because again, that brings the best art, I think, at times. Just give yourself time, put your phone down, I think is the best way to do it. And also I would like to think, if you're working with an industry team, you know, a manager that you really get on with, like, feel free that your manager should, and again, I don't want to speak for all managers, but for me, like, we are an extension of our artists' mental health, and we are here to have those conversations. And you know, one of my artists, bless her, rang me earlier and was like, do you still really care about this project? I just want to make sure. I was like, I love this project. She's like, that's all I needed to hear. And I was like, that's nice, actually, that she's obviously woken up feeling a certain way, but can have the confidence to call me and we can have a really nice conversation. But yeah, social media, like, there's so many things you can do now with iPhones and Androids where you can lock certain things, or I've seen a lot of artists actually start only following one or two people, so they're not just constantly consuming. That's my tip, is like, I think social media is dangerously fantastic but dangerously brutal at times, so just know your own parameters on it.
What are you seeing that really excites you now? You're thinking, holy fuck, like, this is incredible.
There's two perspectives. One is a very age-old concept, but I think is becoming more and more vital, and it's CRM. I think like direct fan artist relationship and management tools are becoming so important. So for me, there's an amazing company called Open Stage, and I think it's fantastic because it's like, you know what it's like when we did MySpace, you spent so long building up your MySpace profile, that then vanished. You then did Facebook, you got 300,000 people on your Facebook, you've then got to pay to access them. Okay, cool. Instagram, here we go again. Now you have someone that's got 100,000 followers, but you do a story and you're only getting 1,000 reach on it. There's a paywall. For me, the thing that excites me is like anyone that's coming forward with a solution to connect artist and fan directly without putting a paywall in between it. That's the future. So as I say, like, I think Rob and the guys over at Open Stage.
So he's coming on shortly, actually.
Amazing. Well, there you go. You can say that I was hyping him up. Give me free subscriptions. But yeah, actually, someone I've known for years, Sam Jackson, was very, very pivotal in that process. Who was a young promoter I met when he was doing shows in Banbury. And again, I loved his ethos back then. He was doing gigs for free. So if you had a new touring band that was coming up, the label could send them to Banbury, and there'd be 300 kids there that were going to these gigs. I was like, I love that. That's how I grew up. And then he started working with Open Stage, signed a band called Only the Poets. They did the Louis Tomlinson tour. They did all the data collection via Open Stage, and all of a sudden he's built this incredible global platform for this artist, which is direct to consumer, and I fucking love that. So that's really exciting for me. And I'll be honest, I'm really starting to lean into, just as a management tool, is ChatGPT and Google Sheets, and actually like, because I'm a technophobe. I'm a nightmare. Like, I know fuck all about tech. I'm the opposite to you. I'm intrigued by it, but I just never grew up understanding it. I've always been sort of more creative focused. So now I can use my creativity and my strategy and my ideas for my artists, but pull it all into one document where it automatically gets updated every week, and they can see where we're at, and they can see how we're strategizing, and they can then ask me questions rather than having to try and work out which band members are off work at what time so we can jump on a Zoom at 7:30 one night, which disrupts my workflow because I'm better working at I'm sort of a 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. brain worker. That's the best for me. So all of these tools now that are coming in, like, I don't want AI to, or ChatGPT to take over anything of the business, but I think as those of us in the industry that can actually look at those tools and utilize them in a way to streamline our artist communications, that's perfect. Because you never want an artist to be like, I didn't know that was happening. But sometimes we're so busy as managers, like, well, you're 10 steps ahead. This is a perfect tool for me now to be like, right. And even like predicting ticket sales. You know, I've been using ChatGPT recently. I've been pulling in my weekly ticket updates, whacking them into ChatGPT, and then being like, right, do me projections for this, loading in our per heads on merch, do me predictions for this. And
what's exciting you the most right now?
The AI stuff's interesting. I won't say exciting, but there are lots of AI artists that are coming through. There are characters that are coming through, obviously they're just AI, they're not real, that are leaning into like country and pop. And I think it's fascinating that I feel like there's a bit of a race on in the background, very under the radar, away from sort of the A&R world, because that's quite the antithesis of what we do. A lot of us don't want to be anywhere near that, me included. But I'm seeing a lot of the AI stuff come through. I'm seeing really savvy young people that drive their own content, that are artists. For me, the sort of gone are the days of an artist that has just a team that organises their schedule and they do digital on this day and then they do content on that day. I think the ones that are all winning for me are these young kids that are driving, that are doing their own edits, that are in their bedroom figuring it out. I think there's a whole generation of kids post-COVID that are super tech savvy, that have taught themselves instruments, and they've managed to find a crossroads between true artistry in terms of instrumentation and musicality and digital understanding. And there's a whole wave of these young kids, and I think they're the future. This is why the band thing's starting to pop up again, in my opinion. They've all got managed to grapple the internet properly now, and are bringing a bunch of kids with them, sort of thing. So I think it's a really interesting time. But
let's talk about that AI thing, because I've heard some great stories recently around. A lot of this comes from the scalability of a talent, right? And we talked a little bit about difficulty of managing talent earlier.
And the cost of
Imagine just being able to switch talent off. All right, that's a bit annoying now, actually. I think I'll just switch you off. This AI talent, and I've seen, I don't know how much we can talk about it on here, but we've seen some serious stuff coming. I've been at a few marketing conventions. It doesn't just work in music, by the way. There's lots of this coming in other fields too. Imagine that. Imagine having these completely constructed personalities that are stars. That's pretty crazy to think of a world in 10 years where we don't have a Beyonce that's a real person. We have an equivalent of Beyonce that is just a character.
I don't think it'll get to that place. I might be wrong. I think it's important that we're walking towards it. I'd like to, maybe I'm just a dreamer, but I like to believe that we're on this road of sort of pursuit of AI and stuff like that in order to get back to the start.
I hope so, because it does feel like a fairly terrifying world.
The first real, like, what the hell moment was when End Up sold out the O2 Arena.
Right.
Because we'd sold it out. It was rammed to the rack. We did the whole tour was sold out, and I just had a memory of us being at the under 18s nights, that, like, one CD not working and having to sort of burn another one off a laptop because the bit's missing. Two of the microphones being dead, and then passing them around like juggling microphones on stage. And,
brilliant.
And then going to having full-on production, lighting, dancers, pyros, CO2 bursts, merchandise, and going to experience that at, like, up close and personal, and to see every step along the way of that. It was I remember being so moved.
You know, I've been in music now for exactly 20 years, which makes me feel very old. I started very young. And I mean, you know, one of the obvious highlights is Adele, working with her from the very beginning and just being a real part of that journey across the first 3 albums. Just absolutely mind-blowing. And
was you there right at the beginning?
Right at the beginning.
Right. Because I remember going to her showcase when Simon Amstell was hosting it. Was you there at that one?
Yeah, the XL one.
Yeah, and Simon Amstell was... Jack Peñate was headlining.
Jack Peñate, who uses TuneCore.
Even to this day?
To this day, it's very
Big
funny,
up
actually.
Pinate.
I do joke. There's quite a few old XL artists who use TuneCore now. It's a bit of a reunion. So we have Jack, Subtract, Lapsley. And it's lovely because...
But do you remember that showcase, though? Do you remember when she came out? She was first
I
out.
remember it so well. Yeah. But I also remember seeing her upstairs at... What was the venue that was opposite the Barfly? There was like a tiny, tiny little venue there. And there was a lineup. It was headlined by Laura Marling,
right?
Florence and the Machine,
right?
Jack Pinate, and Adele.
Right.
Playing to like, I don't know, 20 or 30 of us on a Sunday afternoon.
Nice.
You know, Adele rocking up, acoustic guitar.
Yeah. And that's the thing people don't know, because I said this, I put this out on Instagram ages ago, a picture, because I've got a picture from that showcase. Yeah. Weirdly, I don't know how, but she came out in this kind of floral dress with an acoustic guitar, which is quite a far cry from...
Oh my God, absolutely.
Adele now.
Yeah.
And I remember she goes, I remember her first line was, all right, everyone?
You're right.
All right?
Yeah.
All right, everyone? Everyone just kind of looked at her and went, oh, what is this?
Excuse me, dear lady.
What is this?
But I was talking with the girls just before this, actually, about, you know, one of the reasons why she will be a forever artist, and it is her nature.
Yeah.
You know, she is one of the people who is truest to herself. Yeah, I've never met an artist that has that global resonance with people because she is just herself. There is a very real issue with streaming fraud.
Yeah.
And, you know, different companies are dealing with it in different ways. But the bottom line is there are some pretty nefarious folk out there that are finding a way to game the system.
Yep.
And that money goes back into all kinds of horrible places that you don't even want to think about. So, you know, every single distributor, ourselves included, have had to, you know, really come down on that. And we've actually been part of creating a body in the US, which is like an official music fights fraud body, essentially.
I mean, I feel like we're getting into slightly a technical part of the industry, but I do think it's important, because I think the kind of people that might hear this might not even realise that streaming fraud is a thing.
Anyone that doesn't, if you Google streaming farm bots and watch the video of, I can't remember if it's...
Is this the video with like loads of phones in a row?
Yeah, it's basically loads of phones on tripods, just streaming. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's absolutely terrifying. Yeah. And then you think about where the source of that money goes to, and it's supporting all the traditionally bad and illegal things in the world. It's really scary.
Yeah, and I think it's probably hard for an artist to think too deeply about where that money's going after that, because their immediate concern is, can they get 100,000 streams?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I totally appreciate... But
again, this goes back to what we were saying about, you know, both of our early careers as well, is an industry based on hopes and dreams will always have people out there that are trying to manipulate it and are trying to, you know, get to the source of that emotion, which is, I want my music, which is based on emotion, to be out there and to be successful. You know, someone comes holding what you think is the golden ticket, you're going to jump. But that's where we have a responsibility as distributors, the industry have a responsibility, education. Educate yourself to the nth degree. And I think even more now as an independent artist, you have to educate yourself on every single element of what you do and every single part of where your music will go, because you need to be able to hold people accountable as well.
Let's just touch on people like Billie Eilish, Lady Gaga, Take That. I mean, can you share like a memorable moment or milestone with either of those acts that you remember going, yeah, that was pretty special? Little Soul would look at Big Soul and go, well done you, that's pretty special.
Take Gaga first. So Gaga was working at William Morris, signed out of America, and I got asked to take her on. So I had a look. Yeah, it looks a bit crazy. I quite like it.
Couple of tens in there.
Pop music. Yeah, definitely some tens in there. And they were like, right, we're going to launch her in the UK first, because I think she'd been through 2 or 3 record deals. You know, America's a big market. Britain's a tiny market. Obviously have an incredible relationship with pop music. And I think they were thinking she was a Madonna Mark II. So she had the song Just Dance. It started moving. I remember the first gig we did was Brixton Academy. We then we were going to support Take That up in Lancashire Cricket Ground, and then Glastonbury was the third show she was going to do.
Yep.
So I went to Brixton Academy, and I remember watching it, and
I was there, by the way.
Were you?
Yep.
I just remember watching it and just going, "Oh!"
I was with quite a lot of industry pals, and we all went, "Oh, okay, this is the real deal."
That was the first show she'd done. First show I'd gone to see.
Yeah.
I could have been at Wembley Stadium.
Yeah, it was massive. I remember.
Like, if ever a performance is gone, this is now a foregone conclusion. Like, if you were in that room, every single person walked away weren't going, she is Madonna. Like,
well, it was super textured. There was lots going on. It wasn't just dancers. It was everything. It was playing.
She had
it was everything.
All the visuals running.
Yep.
Obviously, all the costume changes. So then what happened as well is she was running all of the visuals, and she was programming them, still filming them. She was programming the whole thing herself. She ended up having people working 24/7. They ended up not making the Take That concert, going all the way through. And I remember going to see them at Glastonbury, and we were doing an afternoon slot on the other stage.
Right.
And I remember seeing all the crew. What's going on? They're like, we haven't slept. And I was like, Jesus, everyone all right? And they were like, well, yeah, we're getting there, and the show it should be okay. And we're like, oh,
right.
And I spoke to the guy who did the program in the Pro Tools, and I went, how much involvement is she? And he went, she's done all of it. She slept the least out of everyone.
Wow.
And I was like, does she do programming? He went, she doesn't know as much as me, but he went, I would hire her as a junior programmer. She's that good at Pro Tools and putting it all down. Every single thing came from her herself. She must have been up, and when I say 3 days straight, she must have got some sleep, but not a lot. And she was sleeping in the rehearsal room.
Would you think there'll be a misconception there, though, won't there, that she's come straight as a young teenager and become a star? She'd been working at this a long time.
Yeah.
You know, it'd taken her a good 10 years to be an overnight success.
She'd done a lot of New York club shows. She was very well versed in that. And I think the Lady Gaga was a concept in her head, which obviously she trialed it with different projects before. So, it was the culmination. She also had that opportunity, and she wasn't going to let it go. And it was, like I said, that is the first... I'll come on to Billy afterwards, but one of the first foregone conclusions that I'd ever seen in terms of a first gig, and it was just absolutely unreal. Essentially, if you think of someone who's got a top trumps card, and there's lots of different elements to it, you just got to see a 10 somewhere. Yeah. And if you see a 10 somewhere, then you go, okay, that's one column that's banked. Now, a lot of the time when you see people very early door, they've had no money spent on them. So, how can you judge a production on them? They've got no, how you even if...
I love that analogy, by the way, the top trumps. For anyone, we're a certain age, Sol, but hopefully people still play top trumps, but I think they do. The idea that you'd have this card that has these different skills on it, and you have a rating on each one of these skills.
I did get to make tea for Kurt Cobain, which still is one of my...
How did he take it? How did Kurt Cobain take his tea?
I still say 2 sugars, but memories could be hazy. Courtney Love used to come into the office, and I made them tea on several occasions. So
I remember actually the box, and in particular, you had the show Pop Rivals happened, and then there was this kind of moment where we agreed that we would play whoever wins it on every single channel. And it was obviously Girls Aloud, and they were versus One True Voice.
One True
Voice. And we was all kind of waiting, thinking, I wonder who's going to win. We all hoped it would be Girls Aloud. I think, no disrespect to them, but I think we all hoped. Anyway, so cut a long story short, they launched, and they weren't perfect.
Nope.
Right, but Sound of the Underground was clearly a banger.
Yeah.
Now, were you involved in that process, or did it come a bit later?
No, I was involved from the start. So
right. Okay.
I was involved from when they were from the audition process.
Wow.
All the way through to the moving into the house.
Wow.
I'd got a couple of people that were helping me just put the tracks together for the live TV shows.
Right.
but I was front and centre.
Oh, wow. So you were really in that driving seat.
But I also had Sound of the Underground. So I'd signed a group on a development deal and it hadn't worked out, but I signed them because of a song called Sound of the Underground, which I absolutely thought was a number one record.
Right. And
I loved Brian Higgins and Miranda, who had written it. And I was just convinced it was a hit. So when it came to doing that show, I thought, let's just take a risk. This is the song. And I remember playing it to people and saying, this is the song we're going to go with if they win. And everyone was like, well, they're not going to win then, are they?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't care.
It didn't sound anything like anything else at the time. No. It didn't sound like a pop song, really. No,
it didn't.
Not a traditional pop song.
No, it was a breakbeat, and you know, it was. But I knew that we had to take a risk, and because fundamentally, the girls were going to struggle against the boys. But if we were the punk outfit of the two, then we've got a shot. And I think that's where that spirit of the underdog rose. And that was Girls Aloud all the way through. Because it was never an easy journey. And the first album was a struggle because you're trying to get 5 girls to create a sound, and it's all as you've had a number one record. So you're not being given months to develop what you're about and them to develop their personalities. Yeah. So that first album was a real hodgepodge of just trying to get Brian and Miranda to come up with something, and then No Good Advice came, which I think really gave us a lifeline. Yeah. And our big break on that first album was we did a cover of Jump, which was in Love Actually. Yep. And it took us the roof off, and I think it changed their careers. Somebody who I've got a lot of respect for, Louis Walsh, had done an amazing job with Boyzone of doing the heavy lifting as it was, and he'd come into Polydor and said, "Look, I'm now ready to go to the next level. I need an A&R person," and I said to Lou, I'd love to do it. So I ended up becoming their A&R person, and I remember it is that I just thought there was a great bunch of guys, but there was 2 people, especially Ronan, who just had a voice that was so uniquely. He had a way of being able to sing that made you believe him, and that's a unique gift. And I think that I go back to when I heard Words or "Sorry, Baby, Can I Hold You Tonight." I just, every time he sang,
Baby Can I Hold You, one of my favourite tracks.
And I think that's a really underrated, amazing cover that he did. But Ronan had this magic in the way that he sung, and so did Stephen Gately, and the two of them really complemented each other. And it was a real honour to work with them because, again, another band that's not really. I watched the boy bands forever, and they're kind of just dismissed. Yeah. And it was bizarre because that you go back to those records, and they were great records. And I used to say, you put Boyzone on TV, and Ronan would look at the camera, and you've got a hit because he had that magicalness to him. Yeah, and that we followed that through. I mean, Stephen Lipson was an amazing producer who did "Baby Can I Hold You Tonight." And I think really took it to another level. No Matter What became just one of those records that it just opened every avenue. And then when we came to doing the solo records with Ronan, they had that magical moment with Notting Hill with When You Say Nothing at All, which really opened it up. But then the mother of all songs for me was Life Is a Roller Coaster that the amazingly talented Greg Alexander, who's in the New Radicals, gave us, and I think him and Ronan just bonded, and that's probably one of the biggest records I've ever worked on.
And I remember being at the Box in the early 2000s, late 99 of course, but early 2000s in particular, when there was that Boyzone, Ronan, Keaton kind of divide, and often you think, can a solo act do it? Can the lead guy come out of a Boyzone or take that and do it on his own? We've proven it can be done. Was it proven it can't be done a couple of times?
God, yeah. And there's not many that have. I mean, Ronan's, next to Harry Styles, though Harry's probably more global, but I think Ronan's first 2 albums were absolutely huge. Oh, and it was a phenomena. It really was. And again, I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves.
No, and one thing he doesn't get enough credit for is how easy it is for everyone to replicate his voice and pretend to be Ronan Keating. Yeah. There's not many lead guys you can do that because of the tone.
His tone was amazing.
It'd be great to hear from your perspective, because a lot of artists listening to this, I know we work with artists all the time, and they are pretty much obsessed with this idea of sync. I want my song featured on FIFA 25. I want my song featured on Love Island. How do I do it? Who are the gatekeepers? How do I do it? Because everyone thinks that that's their rainbow. That's the gold chest at the end of the rainbow.
Sure.
That's the thing that's going to sustain them. Now, you've had an incredible amount of success in sync, somewhat spearheaded by the success of this track, but also from your own work as a songwriter and a collaborator. So it'd be great to just hear from your perspective, from a slightly more industry side, I guess, of what are the best practices around sync if you're an artist?
Yeah, the advantages of sync are this. I mean, one, obviously you get paid, which you don't very often in the music industry. And two, it sort of gives you a humongous audience. So historically speaking, I think I've done nearly 100 syncs over the last sort of 6-7 years.
100 syncs?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Pushing that. Don't quote me. And the most successful ones haven't necessarily been the big budget ones, but they've been ones that have been on popular TV shows. And then what happens is you can sort of cross-pollinate, as I'd maybe suggest, audiences. And it's amazing for discovery. So, for example, I don't know, recently, a couple of weeks ago, I did a spot on Tulsa King, which is a Paramount thing with Sylvester Stallone. And, you know, I'd envisage that if you're a super fan of Tulsa King, you listen to it and you go, oh, well, that song, that's a great song, I wonder what that is. And then you go on the internet and you find it. So what I do is if I have a crossover song, so a song that's a Samuel Jackson song, which is going to be on TV and film, I then either release the song or put it on put it everywhere. Put it on YouTube, the audio on YouTube, and blah, blah, blah. The amount of discovery I've had via that has been insane.
On YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube.
Because it's very interesting to say that, and I'm sorry, just not to cut in there, but what's fascinating is obviously I worked in TV myself for a long time, and when I used to sit in the edit rooms with the producers, it was not even unusual that they would put the screen, as you imagine they've got a couple of screens, they'd put one screen over here with the piece, with the edit, and the bit they want to find some music for, and on the other screen they get YouTube up, and they literally type in, this is the power of keywords, right? They would type in dark, gloomy rap, and then it will spring up a bunch of suggestions, and sometimes they're from big artists, sometimes they're from small artists. They'll press play on YouTube and run the scene over here. Or maybe they've got an idea in their head of a track, maybe it's an Ed Sheeran track or a Stormzy track or whatever, and they'll put it on YouTube and they'll play it over the top, because that's the crudest way and the quickest way to do it. And then what they'll do is they'll tell the researcher, oh, can you go and find this track for us? We want to license it, because they've just found it on YouTube.
Yeah.
And then that person would go and speak to a publisher, and the publisher would go, you know, oh, it's going to cost you whatever, £10,000 for a 30-second usage over a 12-month period of time or whatever. Yeah. And then you go back to the budget, and the budget goes, we can't quite afford Rag and Bone Man Human, but do you have like a, you know, I don't know, Billy and
Samuel Jack,
a Samuel Jack version of it, you know, or sort of similar vibe. And that's what they would do. And that's when a sync agency would get involved, or maybe they would reach out to someone that they know. More often than not, and this is the scary fact here, is the friend of the producer or the friend of the editor will just divert to their own friend's music that someone sent them personally.
Yeah.
And use that because they don't have the budget, so they'll just use their friends. And it's quite opportunistic. But this whole thing about YouTube, I think, is massive. And I think artists need to really, I think what you just said there is absolutely something artists should think about. Keywords and putting it on YouTube, even as an instrumental, even as an audio, just put it on your YouTube channel.
All my audio, everything I release goes on there, for sure. Yeah. Even unreleased music.
The main thing I think is making content for the sake of it is such a slippery slope. Like basically people whose strategy is, I'm going to post on TikTok.
Yeah.
And they don't think beyond that.
Yeah.
The content that always connects with people is stuff that has emotion attached. You've got to make people feel something.
Yeah.
And so many of the things that artists post are them in their room looking dolled up, doing some lip sync to their song.
Yeah.
And it's fine. But why does that move people? Like find something that's an emotional trigger either in the topic of the song and what you can pull out of that, or is there something you can be doing that lets people into your life a bit and shows your personality?
Yeah.
I just think that's so important. Like that's always that when you look at what gets engagement, it is stuff that has emotion attached.
Yeah, emotion, and I think you also touch a little bit on intentionality, because I think we often will talk to an artist and they'll go, okay, well, TikTok tells me I've got to post every day. Now look at the TikTok playbook that you can get from them, and they'll go, okay, right, duets and stitches, cool. Tick, tick, tick. And it becomes a box ticking exercise rather than a creative exercise. And that's definitely something I see. And I think you have this additional nuance now of speaking to these Generation Z people. But let's just kind of peel that back a little bit and kind of go, what do you hear in that room also? So when you're talking to these different individuals, what do you hear in that room sometimes that you kind of go, like a bit of a eureka moment? Like, how many eureka moments have you had in that room where you've gone, oh, wow, okay, that's different. And that's certainly different from what other people interpret this audience to be more appealed to. No, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean, are more attracted to.
To get them out of the way, because the buzzwords that everyone always talks about, but I can vouch for this being what is always talked about, is authenticity and relatability. I think everyone's bored of hearing those words now 100%. About what Gen Z want from things, because that, like, it's easy to overuse them. But like authenticity, what I think in artist terms, what that really means is people showing what's something true to them and showing how they feel about something and telling their story in a really like believable way. And I think the storytelling is one of the bits I've taken from radio production, because lots of that is about like shaping a story to help build an audience. I think just that bit is just so valuable. It's like working out what you want people to know about you, or what you want people to remember about you. Sometimes when I do a bit of like, not media training, but like coaching, social coaching, I suppose, with artists occasionally. If I'm sitting down with an artist, one of the first questions that I'm always curious about is like, what do you want people to remember about you? Or if I was telling my friend about you, what would you want me to say? And that might be sometimes their brain goes to like other artists that you'd want to compare them to, which is a route you could go down, but also just about the like what drives them to make things, and what is their creative, juice made of. And I think using that as a strategy is important. And I think, yes, you can be posting on TikTok every day, but if you've lost sight of why you're doing it, or who the audiences you're trying to connect with, then that content won't be authentic. Because you're just churning it out. When it comes to the creative treatments of something, and particularly if you're finding new ways to cut through, as every artist has to do, even huge label groups, every single new artist that comes out of the door has to present themselves in a different way to the last one, because you don't want to be just wheeling out the same formula. It's got to be reinvented all the time. And so there's this constant churn of new ideas, and often it's the same people having the ideas. Like, they are relying on what has worked before, or essentially a trend that they've seen someone else do, and they're like, oh, this could work for us. And it's like lots of it is built on assumptions made from data, and then just quickly being reactive to what's going on. But I think the best way to be really authentically true and reach a young audience is by involving the young people in the creative process. And if that also means you're getting to like properly pay, like, value some young people's opinions and creative ideas as part of it, and bring them into the process, and maybe get a diversity of opinions that you would never have had from your own team. That is always going to be so valuable. And I can see that sometimes that adds complication for people. They're just like, oh no, we know what we're doing, we're just going to get on and do it. Like, I don't want to have to deal with a bunch of strangers, or like, where do I find the people, or whatever it might be. But I would always encourage people making any creative work aimed at young people, and you're doing it by the people that you're choosing to work with, to not just have the young people in the room, and particularly from all different backgrounds, and the diversity of the pool of people is so important, so that you're not all thinking the same, and so that you're sense checking each other about like, does this work for everyone, or is this just what people like me would want? That's super important. But making sure that their voice is like the loudest in the room, almost like.
And so who was your first music client?
Probably Blue. And at the same time, around that time, Jerry left the Spice Girls.
Right.
And because Jerry had a relationship with the senior people at Freud's, that got passed down to Jonathan and I as well.
Right.
So it all sort of came together at the same time, that we got a few music people.
So it was like around It's Raining Men. It was
way before then. It was the day she left the Spice Girls.
Oh my God. So right the way back to the...
so we started...
What was the song on the boat? The
Chico Latino.
Yes.
I mean, the gays are crazy from a Chico Latino. So at that time, like, we were sort of pursuing getting acts like Blue and Mystique and other big pop acts at the time. But at the same time, Jerry came to us into our department as well. So we ended up doing Jerry from the day she left the Spice Girls right up until the third album.
Wow. Okay. So you was right away across that journey.
Yep. The whole thing.
When I looked through roster, past and present, it was just littered with every huge pop act, really. Tell me a few that you work with that that you thought, okay, of all the people I've worked with, I would say these guys or these girls were definitely like up there with my favorite clients? Maybe not favorite, maybe that's a bit unkind, but
I mean, it's really difficult to play favorites.
Sure, don't play favorites. Just select five that you come to mind.
I could say people are special for different reasons. Like Little Mix to me are my girls.
Yeah.
And I adore them. I still work with Jade and Perry now.
Yeah.
Still love Leanne. And so they're super special to me and super important to me. Like they are, they're my girls. I mean, so I can't
they're amazing as well. And they are amazing. I mean, they still give me my favorite moment. I think it was on when we filmed them at Channel 4 and they were doing the accents.
Oh, right.
And I think it was Jess that done a bag of gang.
Oh my God, it was you that did that.
Yeah, hopefully we didn't do too much damage. It wasn't quite like Craig David's Bow Selector, but it definitely...
that was definitely another moment.
Had an impact at the time, yeah.
There's definitely a snobbery from the industry that want to box people into being like a heritage act.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh yeah, they're sort of, will do like heritage festivals and, you know, what a classic pop doing a cover with them and, you know, which is fine. I mean, by the way, I really like Classic Pop magazine. I think it's great, but like, it's kind of like you're sort of boxed into that area.
Right.
And I think what we were keen to do is be like, this is not a heritage act. And in fact, with the new album that we've just done, which was a top 10 album, which loads of people were like, oh my God, I can't believe Louis is in the top 10.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's a really good album. Like, you should listen to it. It's like, it's doing really well. We were like, even when like, I think the first couple of interviews, like the headlines were literally like, I don't want to be a heritage act. I'm not a heritage act. Like it was really important to get that message through that like, this is a relevant record. You know, it's produced primarily by John Shave, who just did Charlie XCX.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of people that don't compute that the person behind Charlie XCX's Brat is the same person that's done Louisa's Confessions.
Yeah.
Like, so, and you know, they're both culturally relevant records, but of course, when you're an older artist that had a lot of success 20 years ago, you don't get the same level of respect or support from the industry. It's harder when you're that artist, I think.
I think it's very interesting because again, we don't want to necessarily go down the line of ageism in the industry and things like that.
Well, I mean, that is a part of it, of course.
Right.
But I mean, I think a lot of these, I mean, you know, if you look at the fact that Kylie came back with like Padam Padam and was like a massive record, like that far into her career, it shows that like, it's kind of irrelevant. Like it's kind of like it's about the song and it's about the artist.
Yeah.
And I think that was a bit of a wake up call to loads of people in the industry that had written someone like Kylie off. It's like, oh, she won't have another hit. Like, you know, she can release albums and get a number one album because of the fan base. And, you know, we'll talk about later probably like queer fan bases and how loyal they are to people.
Yeah.
But like, it was like, oh, it won't be, she'll never have like a culturally relevant record. And then she comes out with Padam. I think it's interesting because like, I've seen Kylie do interviews where she talks about like now at her concert, she's got like 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds and 16-year-olds who come into it now because they love Padam and the Tension album and they love like this is unimportant to them, like this whole age nonsense.
So let's talk a little bit about loyal and fandoms. We touched on fandoms earlier. You know, you like your Lady Gaga, Troye Sivan, Charlie XCX. They're powered by LGBTQ plus communities. But why do you think, just very shortly, why do you think queer fans connect so fiercely with pop artists? What is it in your opinion? Why does that connect so fiercely?
What a lot of people like who are outside of the community might not understand is that as an LGBTQ person, you've had to fight for your authenticity a lot of your life, especially coming back from like when I grew up, like, you know, like I grew up in a tiny village. There was no gay people. Like I didn't know any gay people. Like I never met a gay person. Like, like it's just.
But did you know you were gay?
Yeah, I did. And I think people knew I was gay. Like, I mean, come on. Like, it's not like, it's like, oh, surprise, shock. I didn't know you were gay. Like, sometimes when you're like sort of very front facing as an LGBTQ person, you know, obviously you can get a lot of stick for that. And so, like, I grew up in those times. And I think that, you know, finding your authenticity in cities or with your tribe, or a lot of people, whether they're gay, lesbian, trans, non-binary, bi, like, you know, they've had to like find their identity and their authenticity outside of, I don't want to use the word norms of society, but you know what I mean. So like they've had to find their own lane. And I think that they identify with artists that have done that as well. Do you know what I mean? Those artists that you mentioned there have, again, an authenticity about them, a creativity. They've created their own narrative in their own lane. And like, you know, when you think about, you know, Madonna or Lady Gaga, or, you know, even people like Chappell and Charlie that are doing massively well at the moment. These are people that have gone out there, have got an identity, have fought for themselves. And I think LGBTQ people can really resonate with that because they've had to do that in their daily lives.
Yeah.
Unless you're living that, sometimes you might not really understand that that's going on.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
I bet a lot of people don't understand.
But why would they? If you're a straight person that's just sort of always lived authentically, so you know your relationships were always authentic, you had no problem introducing your girlfriend to anyone or your boyfriend, or you know you've lived a way that has been totally accepted your whole life. I'm not sure that you give that much thought to the fact that I've had to create my own authenticity, as have every LGBTQ person. So you know there may be not a lot of thought is given to that's why they resonate so LGBTQ people resonate so massively with those characters.
Make sure you subscribe and drop us a follow on Instagram to get involved with the conversation. For more information, go to blindingtalent.com or drop us an email at industry@blindingtalent.com. Thank you.